The Bavarian Minister of Agriculture, Michaela Kaniber, does not want the supply of food to come into a similar dependency as in the energy sector. In view of the corona pandemic and the Ukraine war, it's clear that Europe needs food sovereignty, Kaniber told the German press agency. That should be discussed at the German Agriculture Ministers' Conference at the end of March. In times of globalization and open markets, food security was dismissed by some as old-fashioned, but now people are concerned about the origins of products and supply chains again. Last year, Russia and Ukraine accounted for 29% of global wheat trade. In the case of sunflower oil, the share is almost 80%, said Kaniber. Europe must become independent in the food supply in order not to be open to blackmail. The fact that we have to reduce food imports from other continents for ethical, environmental, and climate protection reasons only reinforces the need. But the agricultural production areas are getting smaller and smaller due to housing construction, infrastructure projects, photovoltaic and wind power plants, or for compensation areas. At the same time, society wants fewer fertilizers and pesticides, thereby reducing harvests. We have to put everything to the test again in the European Union, demanded the minister. At the moment, consumers do not have to fear any supply bottlenecks, she emphasized though. The corona rules for holiday returnees to Germany are becoming easier. As of yesterday, countries are no longer considered high-risk areas with more extensive requirements such as quarantine requirements upon entry, as announced by the Robert Koch Institute, the RKI. The background to this are changes to the nationwide entry regulations. According to this, only states and regions are now classified as high-risk areas in which virus variants with more worrying properties are rampant than the Omicron variant that dominates in this country. However, the 3G rule still applies to all entries into Germany, as the Federal Ministry of Health emphasized. Anyone who has not been vaccinated or has recovered must have a negative test. This obligation to provide evidence now applies from the age of 12 instead of 6. The RKI also points out that the classification of risk areas can continue to change at short notice. As of Wednesday, around 60 states were still on the RKI list of high-risk areas. In general, anyone who comes from high-risk areas and has not been fully vaccinated or recovered must be in quarantine for 10 days and can only get out of it 5 days after entry with a negative test at the earliest. The new regulation brings special simplifications for families with children. Children under the age of 12 can now test themselves directly from the quarantine when they return. For children under the age of 6, it does not apply to these areas, but not when returning from virus variant areas. In this way, countries can be classified in which variants with particularly threatening properties occur, for example, because they largely bypass vaccination protection. According to the RKI list, no countries are considered virus variant areas at the moment. According to the police in Munich, a good 45,000 people demonstrated against the Russian attack on Ukraine. Many carried blue and yellow pennants and banners, the colors of the Ukrainian national flag. Children carried banners reading, "Please let peace win" and "Peace for all." Prime Minister Markus Söder also took part in the event under the motto "Peace in Europe and Solidarity with Ukraine" on Wednesday evening. Under no circumstances will we accept a war, an unprovoked war of aggression in Europe. Never, said the CSU chairman. Now we are all Ukrainians and stand by this obligation, he added, referring to aid from Bavaria. With the rally, several parties wanted to set a common signal on political Ash Wednesday, which is otherwise characterized by party disputes and mutual insults. It's an old German tradition. It's a more comedy stuff, but it's not the time for it. Around 300 people protested at Tegernsee not far from a villa of the oligarch Alisher Usmanov. Many carried banners reading "Stop Putin" or "Stop the war in Ukraine now." Some have painted their faces blue and yellow. Usmanov reportedly left Germany on Monday. The CDU has issued clear warnings to the Greens not to use the planned special funds for upgrading the Bundeswehr for other purposes. Party leader Friedrich Merz told the news portal T-Online that Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government and their statement was clear. 2% of gross domestic product from now on for the Bundeswehr, plus 100 billion special funds for procurement in the future. There are green proposals for this kind of. There's no wiggle room for the green proposals. The CDU defense politician Serap Güler told the DPA it cannot be that the Greens parliamentary group is now bringing the special budget into play for the expansion of the energy infrastructure. Güler, who's also a member of the CDU executive board, warned against using these 100 billion semantically for things that have long been on the Greens' wish list. In an interview with the newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the managing director of the Greens parliamentary group, Irene Mihalic, was open to investing parts of the special fund in energy supply and development work, which would be against the constitution the way the thing is planned, by the way. Economics and Climate Protection Minister Robert Habeck from the Greens said during a visit to Washington on Tuesday, "In my view, investments in military capacities and investments in energy independence from Russia are two sides of the same coin." Güler said that Russian President Vladimir Putin is trampling on international law by denying Ukraine's statehood and its right to self-determination, and by not ignoring civilian targets in its war of aggression. The federal government's reaction came late, but it was very clear. Above all, the clear stance of the foreign minister stood out very clearly here. She praised the appearance of Annalena Baerbock at the UN. I expect that the federal government will continue on its clear course and now also speak clearly about an upgrade in terms of Bundeswehr equipment, Güler demanded. Safety may be an elastic concept. With regard to the Bundeswehr, however, it's now about the security of the soldiers, the fulfillment of the alliance's goals, and the ability to defend freedom and peace against those who would attack them with military means. The U-turn that Baerbock spoke of must therefore be heralded first and foremost in her group. After strong protests against his return as Archbishop of Cologne, Cardinal Rainer Maria Woelki offered the Pope his resignation. Francis will decide in due course, the Archdiocese of Cologne announced on Wednesday. First, however, Woelki took over the management of the Archdiocese of Cologne again on Wednesday after a 5-month break. In a letter to the faithful of the largest German diocese, Woelki asked for a second chance. He wanted to try a new beginning. "I ask you for your openness, your patience, that you give me, no, us, another chance," he said. In the coming weeks and months, he wants to meet as many people as possible in order to listen. "I very much wish and hope that you will meet me in the ways that are necessary for this. I would like to do everything possible to ensure that this can be done openly, fearlessly, and honestly." Woelki cited a kind of burnout as the reason for the 5-month break. "In fact, in October last year, I reached a level of physical and mental exhaustion that made a break necessary," he said. Among other things, during a social service, it became clear to him that some things had hardened in an uncomfortable way in him recently. The 65-year-old admitted that he made mistakes and was guilty. Woelki had taken the break after Pope Francis had certified big mistakes, especially in his communication. The Archdiocese of Cologne has been in a crisis since Woelki decided in 2020 not to initially publish an expert opinion on how diocese officials deal with cases of child sexual abuse. He cited legal reasons for this and commissioned a new report. In the course of this decision, there was an increasing estrangement between the cardinal and the most important bodies of the Archdiocese. Germany and Israel want to significantly intensify their cooperation in the security sector. During his first visit to Jerusalem on Wednesday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett agreed on a new strategic dialogue to be held twice a year. "The new bridge we are forming is good news for the world," said Bennett. "We can bring more stability, more hope, more positivity to our regions and beyond. Scholz spoke of a very important further development of our relations. The visit was otherwise largely determined by the war in Ukraine. Scholz ruled out military intervention by NATO. That would be wrong in this situation, said the Chancellor. What we do is support. Specifically, he mentioned financial aid and relief supplies. The sanctions have already had an effect. This shows that the attitude between consistency and the necessary caution is correct in his point of view. Scholz wants to work to ensure that the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine continue soon. Bennett praised Germany as an anchor of leadership and responsibility in Europe. He was responding to the question of how the U-turn in German defense policy was perceived in Israel. The topic is obviously sensitive in view of history, Bennett said of Scholz's announcement of investments of 100 billion euros in the Bundeswehr, the German army. Bennett said he had a deep conversation with Scholz about the situation in Ukraine. It is our duty to do everything we can to stop the bloodshed. He called for an immediate ceasefire. Negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are still a goal. It's not too late yet, he said. On the basis of Israel's war experience, however, he had to say about the situation in Ukraine, unfortunately, it can get much worse. Israel has not yet commented specifically on media reports that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was saying that Bennett is hosting negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and Israel. After a conversation between Bennett and Putin on Sunday, the Kremlin reported that Bennett offered to mediate in the conflict. According to media reports, Israel is also said to have rejected a request from Kiev for arms deliveries. Since the start of the Russian attack on Ukraine, there has been disbelief in many places. The attack caught the AfD and Die Linke, the left, ice cold. Behind the scenes, there are some heated arguments about their causes. Both parties are known for their proximity to Russia, but now, in an emergency, there is a need to sort themselves out. In the left-wing faction, the Russia question led to a scandal on the open stage after the historic special session of the Bundestag on Sunday. Foreign policy spokesman Gregor Gysi wrote an angry letter to the faction members and sharply criticized the former faction leader Sarah Wagenknecht and 6 other MPs. They have written a statement in which, among other things, they reject German arms deliveries to Ukraine and economic sanctions against Russia. Gysi accuses the group around Wagenknecht of contradicting the line of faction leadership and party leadership. With a categorical no to arms deliveries, one denies Ukraine's de facto right to self-defense, and one is indirectly in favor of giving it only the chance of unconditional surrender. You are only interested in saving your old ideology in every respect, writes Gysi, implying that his party colleagues are completely lacking in emotion with regard to the suffering in Ukraine. And he asked a question that goes straight to the core of his party. Don't we have to think about ourselves too, understand a certain turning point? He will also have to think about his role as foreign policy spokesman. Wagenknecht is then outraged on their website about Gysi's allegations. The AfD has been hidden by this crisis on its Achilles heel because the party has been promising a close relationship with Russia for years. Party and faction leader Tino Kruppalla met Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and appeared at a Russian Defense Ministry conference in June 2021. However, the extreme right-wing AfD also has members who, in view of the Russian attack on Ukraine, are now not only calling for Russia to be clearly named as responsible, but also for a comprehensive change of course, as the left-wing faction in the Bundestag did at least in the plenary session on Sunday. There have been heated internal discussions about this in recent days. A further debate is expected at a parliamentary group meeting planned for next week. The AfD parliamentary group leader Alice Weidel now calls the Russian attack a violation of international law. However, she rejects the German arms deliveries to the Ukrainians. When asked about it, she said through a spokesman, "Germany should act as an honest broker and initiate diplomatic process. We shouldn't intervene in combat operations by supplying weapons." Her behavior in the Bundestag on last Sunday and that of her group made everything absolutely clear. If you have seen this, you'll be disgusted. Against the background of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the pressure on former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder is increasing. According to media information, several employees wanted to part with the Social Democrat Schröder. Christian Democrat General Secretary Mario Chaya called for the end of Schröder's connection to Russian companies within 48 hours. The demand came from the union, but also from the Social Democrats, to withdraw Schröder's office. According to information from the TV broadcaster Welt, Bundesliga club Borussia Dortmund already has withdrawn Schröder's honorary membership. The Swiss media company Region put its consulting mandate on hold. In the meantime, even close confidants are apparently turning their backs. After more than 20 years, his longtime office manager and speechwriter Albrecht Funk is turning his back on Schröder, reported the news portal The Pioneer and the newspaper Hannoversche Allgemeine Zeitung on Tuesday. 3 other employees also gave up their jobs. Schröder and his office were initially unable to comment. With the farewell of the 4 employees, the office of the former chancellor would be deserted. According to the Pioneer report, there were alleged differences between Funk and Schröder over the Russian attack on Ukraine. Funk is said to have recommended his boss to quickly and clearly distance himself from Kremlin boss Vladimir Putin and to resign from all supervisory board mandates in Russian companies. So far, nothing is known of such steps or considerations by Schröder. The former chancellor is considered a longtime friend of Putin. Schröder is the head of the supervisory board at the Russian state energy company Rosneft and also has management positions in the Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 pipeline projects. Last Thursday, he called on the government in Moscow on the online network LinkedIn to end the war in Ukraine as quickly as possible, but there was no talk of personal consequences. Former CDU politician Erika Steinbach has joined the AfD. The reason for this was the way in which longtime AfD party leader Jörg Meuthen withdrew, Steinbach told the German press agency on Tuesday. Meuthen justified his resignation by saying that large parts of the party had opted for an increasingly radical course. "This is infamous and does not correspond to the truth," said Steinbach. She has been chairwoman of the AfD-affiliated Desiderius Erasmus Foundation since 2018, and I expected that move for a long time. Just read what she's posting on Facebook. She is so full right-wing AfD. Oh boy. The financial risks of the Russia conflict and the announcement of higher defense spending are increasing the tug-of-war in the ongoing budget negotiations. Federal Finance Minister Christian Lindner from the FDP, the Liberals, announced that the 2022 federal budget would be weighted even more strongly according to priorities. The Ukraine war requires a stronger setting of priorities in the budget, Lindner told the Düsseldorf newspaper Rheinische Post. This discussion about the distribution of the available funds within the federal government is naturally becoming even more ambitious because of the events in Ukraine, Lindner said. On Sunday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced a special fund of 100 billion euros to strengthen Germany's defense capabilities for necessary investments and armaments projects. Lindner, who's also chairman of the FDP, said, "The strengthening of defense spending also stimulates other ideas elsewhere. However, we are still aiming to limit new borrowing in the 2022 federal budget to the previously planned 99.7 billion euros. And he said, compliance with the 2023 debt brake is and will remain a requirement of economic wisdom. According to a survey, almost 3/4 of Germans support the planned investment package for the Bundeswehr. According to a representative survey by the opinion research institute CEWE on behalf of the German newspaper Augsburger Allgemeine Zeitung on Wednesday, 74% of the 5,060 respondents welcomed the announcement by Chancellor Olaf Scholz. 19% think they are wrong. 77% answered undecided. The Russian attack on Ukraine has sparked a new debate about introducing compulsory military service in Germany. Politicians from the Union and the Social Democrats called for a discussion on Tuesday about such a step that combines military services and social services. On the other hand, Liberal Parliamentary Group leader Christian Dürr declared a new edition of compulsory military service in Germany to be out of the question. Our task now is to equip the troops well and improve structures so that they can be deployed at any time. It's not about mobilization, it's about full alliance capability, Dürr told the German press agency on Tuesday. The security expert of the Social Democrats parliamentary group, Wolfgang Helmich, told the Düsseldorf newspaper Rheinische Post, "We urgently need to have a debate about general compulsory service, because we need a social consensus for that." He said conscription would promote community spirit. The deputy chairman of the union faction, Johann Wadefuhl, calls for the expansion of the federal voluntary service into a general service in the Bundeswehr and other blue light organizations. If this service is made financially attractive and concrete benefits such as accumulating pension points or easier access to study or training places are created, we have the opportunity to recruit many more staff. And Wadefuhl told this to the German newspaper Welt. And the CSU state group gave a strict refusal to a debate about a return only to conscription. And the extreme right-wing AfD defense politician Rüdiger Lukassen demands that general conscription must be reactivated immediately. In addition, the entire military registration must be rebuilt, he demanded. Compulsory military service was suspended in July 2011 after 55 years under the then Defense Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg from the CSU, which in practice was a tantamount to abolishing military and civilian service. The FDP has demanded this for a long time, and I personally still think it was a big mistake. Companies, associations, organizations, and networks are trying to influence the political decision-making processes in Berlin with millions of euros and thousands of employees. This is shown by the entries in the Bundestag's new lobby register. The deadline for registering there expired on Tuesday night. There were almost 2,400 entries. The number of employees who are now entitled to represent their interests under the rules of the register was around 16,000 at the time. When it comes to expenses, the General Association of the German insurance industry stands out. They stated that they spent around 15 million euros on advocacy in 2020. And registrations continued until Tuesday. In the afternoon, almost 2,500 companies, associations, and other institutions with around 17,000 employees had registered and were now officially allowed to lobby. The publicly accessible lobby register is intended to make visible who is influencing political decisions and legislation. Professional stakeholders were required to register no later than March 1st. Among other things, they have to provide information about their clients and the personnel and financial costs of their lobbying activities in the Bundestag and federal government. The area of interest and the activity also had to be explained. Lobbyists are now also obliged to adhere to specified code of conduct. If they break the rules, they face a fine of up to 50,000 euros. The number of entries fell far short of the expectations of the Bundestag administration. They had assumed that 6,000 to 8,000 stakeholders would register. The entries range from the Baking Ingredients Association and the Federal Association of German Goat Breeders to large organizations such as the Association of the Chemical Industry and the DAX companies. The expenses for lobbying activities are correspondingly different. For the Baking Ingredients Association, for example, this is 30,000 to 40,000 euros a year, and for the VCI around 8.2 million. At the Volkswagen Group, it was around 6.5 million in 2021, with the Volkswagen subsidiaries Audi and Porsche spending another around 2.6 and 1 million euros respectively. The German Farmers Association is involved with around 5.7 million euros, the Association of Municipal Companies with almost 7.9 million. According to the CDU's own information, the Economic Council also spent almost 4.8 million euros on lobbying. Some companies such as Robert Bosch or Roche Pharma refuse to provide this information, which the law expressively allows. However, this has consequences. Such companies are not admitted to public hearings and cannot participate in legislative processes. Critics complain that the register leaves in the dark what the lobbyists are doing with their sometimes immense sums of money. This should change with the sharpening planned by the traffic light parties, as explained by a Green Member of Parliament. In response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the German government wants to achieve independence from Russian oil, gas and coal supplies more quickly. In addition, a forced complete conversion of electricity generation to renewable energies is planned, as the State Secretary in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Franziska Brandner, made clear on Tuesday on Deutschlandfunk. We have now put the first draft laws for the Easter package in the departmental vote, and yes, we are planning a real national effort to advance renewables more quickly to get them on the ground, said Brandner, when asked whether she would like to see a corresponding report from more newspapers, and if she can confirm this. The newspaper reported, citing a paper from the economics department, that electricity in Germany should now come almost entirely from renewable energies by 2035 instead of 2050. And Brandner said, It's not just a question of climate protection, but really of safety. We just have to give everything. Such investments should become more financially attractive for municipalities, companies and other stakeholders. We will now initiate this together in the coalition, she said. With a view to the announced massive investments in the Bundeswehr, the Secretary of State for Economic Affairs said, "We decided together that we need greater efforts for our security, for defense, but also for energy security." Meanwhile, Russia says it continues to deliver natural gas to Europe through transit pipelines in Ukraine. The Interfax news agency reported that the utilization of the pipeline remained at a high level, citing data from the Russian state-owned company Gazprom. Accordingly, 109.3 million cubic meters of gas should be delivered to Europe on last Tuesday, and that was slightly more than on Monday. In the West, there are fears that Russia may turn off the gas supply because of the unprecedented sanctions against the country after attacking Ukraine. The energy superpower, on the other hand, had emphasized that it had always delivered reliably, even in the greatest crises. The CEO of the Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania Climate Protection Foundation, which is largely financed by the Russian state-owned company Gazprom, Erwin Sellering, considers a quick dissolution of the foundation to be illegal. "We are now being asked by some to dissolve the foundation as a whole and also to stop the dedicated work of the office responsible for climate protection, which had and has no connection to Nord Stream 2, and to use the foundation assets from Nord Stream 2 for another purpose. Both is legally excluded," says a statement by the foundation's board of directors, which was distributed in Schwerin last Monday. The former Prime Minister Sellering was responding to the request of his successor, Prime Minister Manuela Schwesig, to initiate a dissolution of the foundation within the narrow legal possibilities. In addition, Schwesig was open to the proposal made by the CDU to use the foundation funds of 20 million euros provided by the Gazprom subsidiary Nord Stream 2 for humanitarian purposes. The founding of the State Foundation for Climate and Environmental Protection was decided by the State Parliament in Schwerin with a large majority at the beginning of last year. However, the foundation was criticized from the start because it included an economic part managed by Nord Stream. This was intended to support the completion of the gas route through the Baltic Sea, circumventing US sanctions. The pipeline is finished, but the federal government stopped the commissioning process after Russian troops invaded Ukraine. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.